Hey, how's it going, universe? Shaun here from Zoobox, and today we're going to be talking about The Searchers, John Ford's The Searchers from 1956. This film was written by Frank S. Nugent, which was an adaptation of a novel by Alan LeMay. The novel was called The Avenging Texans, if I'm not mistaken, and the synopsis goes as follows. An American Civil War veteran embarks on a journey to rescue his niece from the Comanches, which is, in classic IMDb fashion, a complete undersell of the movie. It stars John Wayne, Jeffrey Hunter, Vera Miles, Ward Bond, Natalie Wood, John Quaylen, Olive Carey, Henry Brandon, Ken Curtis, Harry Carey Jr., Hank Warden, and actually Patrick Wayne. Yeah, this is the feature film debut of John Wayne's son, Patrick Wayne, who didn't really have much of a career, but there you go. He's in this movie. So it's strange when we think about these seminal movies, these classic films. A lot of people treat them like museum pieces. Like they're not kind of prescient or visceral or entertaining in the same way that maybe a modern movie is. So they get dismissed a lot. They just kind of get put up on a shelf. Be like, oh, isn't that nice? Isn't that a nice thing? I've had this conversation in the past with people about something like the work of Orson Welles. Orson Welles, I'm a big fan of Orson Welles, and Citizen Kane, right? It's something that people just they pass on by, because of its historical nature. It's a historical piece, basically. A piece of historical ephemera, rather. And it causes a lot of people to dismiss them. We just don't revisit these movies as much as maybe we should. And, we got HBO Max at my house, and they had which was a complete surprise to me, a very pleasant surprise. They have like a Turner Classic Movies section with tons of classic films. And one of them was The Searchers. And The Searchers is something I've been meaning to get back to for years. I've wanted to rewatch The Searchers. It left an impact on me as a child, and I probably only saw it like maybe one time all the way through when I was a teenager. The thing that brought it back to my memory was we were talking about it on a past episode of the regular Zoobox show. We talked about westerns and our favorite westerns. One of my co-hosts and my cousin Michael, he grew up watching a lot of westerns, specifically a lot of John Wayne westerns. His father was a big John Wayne guy. And so we were just kind of discussing our favorite westerns, and this came up. This came up because it is kind of the ultimate western. It almost puts a period on the genre of its stylings, because after this, a lot of westerns kind of, in a meta sense, deal with the end of the West. This would be like right before the end of the West. And and we're going to get into that, they make kind of mention even of that in this movie. The Searchers, while it kind of has like a simple classic western kind of story, it's working on a lot of different levels in terms of what it means to be an American, what it means to have an identity, what it means to have a bias, how our feelings about other people are shaped by our experiences. And I think it's actually gives a much more fair hearing to Native Americans than most movies of the era did. John Ford, much to his credit, was the kind of guy that when he had the ability to do so, if he had Native American characters, he would largely cast Native American actors. The one exception in this movie being kind of the big baddie, the one that is the kind of figurehead of the bad Comanches is, what's his name? I'm not going to be able to find it, I bet. Oh, Henry Brandon, who is a German Jew, and blue eyes, very striking guy. Got a really interesting face, as most of these people do from this time. A lot of these character actors and whatnot, just very interesting people just to look at. And he was no different. So there is that, I guess you wanted somebody that was more of a seasoned actor. And if you think about the time period, 1956, well, a lot of white people, probably not too many Native American actors that were like well seasoned. And you needed somebody with some kind of weight and gravity for this role. It is a fantastic movie. I mean, you could probably tell from the way I've been talking about it. It is probably my favorite western of the era, and it's John Wayne's. He said this was his favorite character and his favorite movie that he was ever in. And they even made note that most of the time John Wayne was kind of a cad. You know, he liked to play pranks. He liked to joke around. He would keep things really light on the set. But for the Searchers, he kind of went in deep and did some character work. And I think it really pays off. He plays a really complicated person with like a really dark past and questionable moral system, and a guy that kind of has a sense of PTSD almost about his life. He was a Confederate soldier, and this is after the war, and he's got a big chip on his shoulder because of that and because of his experiences. And he's kind of a cold bastard for a large part of the movie. He's a man with a singular kind of purpose, but not in the same way that you could, like, you know, you would talk about Clint Eastwood when he did the Sergio Leone movies. Not in the same way, because there's more of a human struggle with the things that happen in this movie, because this is a really dark movie. There's a lot of lightness. You know, John Ford managed to balance kind of like Hollywood bullshit with like a really dark story, and it's all in the implication. It doesn't actually show many of the darkest moments of the story are off screen. You know, the first scene that comes to mind is when there's the family of the girls that get taken. They see that there's something out in the distance, and they realize what's happening. They realize they're about to be raided by a Comanche tribe, and it's absolutely terrifying. They're resigned to the fact that they're probably going to die. They try to get their littlest girl out of there, and that is the whole scene. They don't show you the attack. They show you the aftermath when John Wayne gets back, but it's really harrowing, and it's really disturbing on like this really guttural level. You know, if you think about the way that home invasion movies give me the creeps. Well, I don't know if you would think that, or think about me, how I feel about it, but that's, you know, home invasion movies work so well because it hits us in a really, really just kind of innate, instinctual place. And the idea that your home could be invaded and that you could be, molested or whatever, not sexually necessarily, but just like you could be vulnerable in your own home is something I think a lot of people would be really terrified of. And this would be kind of the ultimate example of that, because what you're dealing with are, people of a different culture that do things differently. And it's terrifying. There's a few scenes like that that are absolutely awful and terrifying and so effective. I think it's the thing that makes it the most effective, and maybe this was just because of the time period, was the fact that you don't see what happens. It cuts away before that, and then you just go back for the result, because it's all implied. Like the brutality of it is all implied. You know, when John Wayne comes over the hill and he sees that the farmhouse is on fire, and he goes into like this little like a cellar, and where obviously like the mother, the matriarch of the household, is, her dead body is there, and who knows what happened to her, you know. Same thing goes for when he finds the older of the two girls that get taken, Lucy. It's all off camera that when he finds her. He goes off to go do some scouting. He comes back and he's really out of sorts, and it's not until a little bit later that you actually discover what happened. That he found her body and that he buried her with his own hands, and it's really sad. It's incredibly intense. And it adds all these layers to this idea of, like, you know, when history is kind of intersecting with the past, and the modern history are kind of intersecting. Because, you know, while you can make an argument in a broad sense, right, that the American settlers are more civilized, but there is a brutality to them as well. There's a brutality to this whole system, and it becomes cyclical. It becomes about generational trauma, and about how the experiences of John Wayne's character in the war, and also with dealing Comanches, there's a nod to something that it's not explicitly said, but John Wayne's mother's character, or John Wayne's character's mother rather, she was killed by Comanches, and she's buried, you know, in the backyard. And you see the tombstone when young Debbie is trying to hide, when she's trying to escape. She goes and hides by the tombstone. And then that is revealed. They don't draw attention to it, but it's a little bit of texture. It's a little bit of something there that informs his character a great deal. And then how those experiences will affect the younger generation, because you had these two young guys that wanted to come with him, and how his kind of biases and his bullshit could infect them and lead them on a life of lonerdom and revenge. Like, he wants to go and slaughter these people that took the girls. He's not there looking for peace. It even comes to the point where he's going to kill Debbie because she has become part of the Comanche tribe. And he thinks, now she's broken. She's forever broken. And this is something that would actually, there is historical precedent for this story. This did happen. They would kidnap women and children, and then some of them would go crazy. Some of them would lose their sense of self, their identity. And it's really heartbreaking, I mean, you got to put it into the context of time and what was going on, and the kind of lifestyle and battling they had, and the conflict between the settlers and the Native Americans. But it's all in a through the prism of 2020. It's all awful, and it's, like I said, it becomes a cyclical thing, and that's why it never stops. And this movie has kind of a positive message at the end, in the sense where it's just like, we are going to try to break the cycle. A newer generation is going to try to break the cycle of violence and be accepting of things that they don't understand, and also not feel like if you've made mistakes or you've been involved in something, you're completely lost. Pretty prescient idea, right? It's pretty relevant to today. That's what great art, that's what great movies do. They're speaking to this more human experience type of paradigm, where where they're universally understood, and they cross generations and they cross time, because the themes and the principles are things that we still think about, we still tell stories about today. The Searchers is no different. And the whole just going back to the generational aspect of it, and this being kind of a period on a genre, there's characters they openly talk about, like, this is a harsh lifestyle, and maybe the future won't happen until our bones are in the ground, because we're the ones, because of our experiences and our traumas and our set in our ways, we're the ones actually partially holding all this back, and it's going to be the future, it's going to be the youth that kind of brings everything into a more peaceful time. And that's something that kind of reverberates through the whole end, because there is like a subplot with one of the characters, what's his name, Martin, starring Jeff, who's played by Jeffrey Hunter, rather. And he actually tragically passed away like in the late 60s, but he had a stroke as a young guy. Actually, if you look at his biography, like the synopsis, Wikipedia or something, it actually follows a very similar trajectory to Leonardo DiCaprio's character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He has kind of a similar experience, because that's what that movie is pulling from, is actors like Jeffrey Hunter. And his subplot is about this woman that he's known since he was a kid, and basically like they're a couple, basically. In an old-fashioned way. There's kind of a distance there, but they love each other. But he is compelled to hold on to the people that he looks up to. His uncle Ethan, John Wayne's character. Like, there's a compulsion to see it through in his way, and that causes a rift between the two of them, and it causes him to almost lose out on the love of his life because of kind of following these old paradigms. And I think the film does a really great job of kind of addressing that. And like I said, at the end, it comes full circle, and John Wayne's character kind of is able to let go a little bit of his pain. Because when a push comes to shove, and he's got this opportunity, he could kill her. He chases her into this cave, this entrance to a cave in the Texas hills. And he just lifts her up like a little girl. And immediately her humanity is brought back to him, and he gets a little bit of his humanity back, and it's actually a really powerful moment. I think the way this movie ends is actually really powerful. It ends with framed in a doorway, and all of the other characters come into the house. It's a happy ending, and Ethan is left on the porch alone, and he just kind of turns and walks away because he knows he can never be part of that. Him being part of that would infect everyone. And that's even something they even foreshadow and bring up in the beginning of the movie when he goes to his sister's house in the beginning, because he's coming back from the war. He's coming back to his family stead, the family farm, and they're like, you've never really wanted a part of this life, and are you going to stay here? And he's like, oh, are you trying to tell me I need to leave? And they're like, no, we're not telling you need to leave. You're happy to stay here as long as you want. But it is his way of life that actually, in a very tangential way, kind of brings about all this tragedy. And it's so effective. Like, it's so impressive because it manages being just like kind of an old-fashioned thrilling Western, but also this deep character study and this deep meta-text, like a meta-level story about the nature of time and generations and who's responsible for what and how do we let go of our aggressions towards each other. So like I said, it's very prescient. It's very relevant to today. And I was really taken by the movie. And it's also just a gorgeous movie in the way that like these movies were. Still, John Ford he produces like these iconic mythic images of the West and the characters in the West and how everything is, both practical sets and like they're obviously outside a lot, but there's also some scenes that are clearly on a stage, but it gives it this picturesque, this beautiful like scenery, this beautiful image that feels iconic. And the movie is full of moments like that. It never stops being beautiful. From the moment it starts to the moment it ends. I mean, that final shot is incredible because it says so much, and it just underlines the thesis statements of the movie without having to point it out to you. That's like another thing I liked about this movie. It's like it really respects the intelligence of the viewer. It respects you as an adult, that you're going to be able to deal with these themes. You're going to be able to figure it out yourself. Nobody really spells anything out. It's all in the performances, It's all in the great writing and the little interactions they have with all the other characters. The most explicit thing, obviously there's an old lady who's like, maybe nothing will change until our bones are in the ground, which was, that is kind of the nature of progress. That's the nature of moving forward. And, we all hold each other back in weird ways. It takes a lot of empathy to change yourself, especially as an adult. And I think that was a really elegant way of referencing that and talking about that without talking about it. And that's why it's so impressive, That's why John Ford is one of the greats, That's why Carpenter loves him so much. I'm actually looking forward to, I might jump into some other John Ford movies. He's obviously famous for his Westerns. He did Grapes of Wrath. He did one of my wife and I's favorite movies, The Quiet Man. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance with Jimmy Stewart and John Wayne. Like, just a really solid director. The guy has a real grasp of storytelling in a way that is special. He's one of these elite, like maybe 40 filmmakers that have ever existed that really, really understood how to utilize the medium. I mean, there's especially of the era, if you think about the Westerns, because it was such a popular genre. I mean, they would churn these things out like crazy. There just wasn't a lot to them. Most of them are really dumb. Most of them are really straightforward and simple and not really interesting. And John Ford just wasn't like that. He was not a lazy director. And he clearly had a great respect for the material that he was putting on screen. And a deep empathy as well. I know that apparently he was a real cranky old guy. He was kind of an asshole. But, as some people are that are like that, you can learn the most from. And he's one of those guys. And I will always appreciate John Ford for that. It's you stand on the shoulders of giants, whether you're reviewing films or you're interested in making films. I mean, just to have this kind of these points of reference. You got to think about the filmmakers of these eras. They didn't have these points of reference. They invented them. That's crazy. I think about that all the time with Orson Welles. Orson Welles invented a new visual language. John Ford, no different. kind of in the same boat. All right, everybody. Well, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if you would like to know more about Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description for our Facebook, for our Instagram, for my personal Twitter. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. We would appreciate it. If you want to see anything specific on these daily videos, these are YouTube and Facebook only. These do not get uploaded to the podcast feed, these daily videos. But if you'd like to see anything specific, hey, leave a comment. You never know. I might get around to it, and I appreciate the support. All right, everybody, you have a good one. Go watch The Searchers. It's on HBO Max. Well worth your time, especially if you've never seen it. Good night. Good day.